No one outside the project knew what was happening that day. The test site was hidden deep inside a hollowed-out moon, far from trade routes and far from curious eyes. Only the people who built the device and the commanders who approved it were allowed to be present. Even they did not fully understand what they were about to witness. The sky above the moon's surface was silent and still. There were no guards in heavy armor, no banners, no large fleets waiting. Everything looked calm, too calm for something that was supposed to change the future. Inside the test base, however, the air felt heavy. As if the walls were holding back a storm, in a long command room, screens glowed with soft blue light. Human engineers stood behind consoles, watching numbers they had memorized 100 times. Military officers watched the same numbers, but for different reasons. None of them spoke. The test was ready, and words felt unnecessary. At the front of the room stood Project Asterion, a device half the size of a person. It had no barrel, no wings, no glowing engine core. It did not look like a weapon at all. It looked like a small machine someone forgot to finish. That was the first reason outsiders would never believe the story later. How could something so simple do something so impossible? The lead scientist, a quiet man with gray hair and steady hands, checked the final readings. He did not smile. He did not relax. He only nodded once, and the room understood that the time had come. "Begin external monitoring," the commander said softly. Across the galaxy, far from the moon, a controlled battlefield had been prepared. Empty cities, old ships, scrap stations, abandoned mines. All of them were filled with simulated conflict, running with real systems and real defenses. Alien and human drones played the roles of fleets, armies, and supply lines. It was a war without people, but it looked real enough. "Prepare the activation sequence," the lead scientist said. Engineers typed quietly. Screens flickered. The device hummed softly, not with power, but with anticipation. No one knew what exactly would happen next. Models predicted results, but predictions were not certainty. Activation in 10, 9, the room grew colder. No one breathed. 3, 2, 1, the device made no sound. There was no flash of light, no blast of energy, no wave of heat. Nothing shook. Nothing moved. The test room looked the same as before. Someone could have walked in at that moment and assumed the machine was broken. But on the distant battlefield, things were different. First, a shield wall failed without warning. It did not collapse, it simply stopped resisting. Then, a communication relay shut down at the exact same second. Moments later, an entire fleet lost navigation, engines freezing mid-burn. Sensors captured no energy attack, no code injection, no contact. Systems did not break. They surrendered. Officers in the room stared at their screens, trying to make sense of the readings. Drones that had been programmed to fight suddenly stood still. Enemy fleets stopped firing. Supply lines unraveled as if someone had cut invisible threads. Then came the most confusing part of all. The strategic AI surrendered. Even though the simulation never allowed surrender conditions, what did we just do? Someone whispered. The lead scientist did not answer. He was looking at a single line of data, repeating over and over from every system across the battlefield. Command acknowledged. No command had been given. Observers outside the project later swore that the moment felt like a quiet earthquake, something too silent to hear but too big to ignore. There were no casualties, no ruins, nothing burned, yet the battlefield reported total defeat without destruction. Hours later, messages began arriving from distant observers and test analysts. They all said the same thing in different wording. It felt like the war ended before it began. In the test chamber, the officers finally spoke, but their voices were soft and unsure. "Is the damage total?" "No damage," an engineer replied. "Then how do we win?" "We don't know." The lead scientist stepped away from the machine. For the first time since the project began, he looked tired, older than his years. He stared at the device as if seeing something hidden beneath its plain surface. "This weapon," he said quietly, "does not destroy what we see. The officers looked confused. Then what does it destroy? One asked. The scientist closed his eyes for a moment before answering. Possibility, he whispered. It removes possibility. No one spoke again for several minutes. Everyone understood the meaning, even if they could not explain the mechanism. This was not a weapon that killed fleets. It was a weapon that ended decisions. It did not attack systems. It attacked certainty. The youngest engineer in the room looked shaken. She finally broke the silence. Should we continue? The lead scientist did not look back at her. His voice was almost too quiet to hear. No, he said. We should stop. But outside the room, far beyond the test moon, the galaxy had already sensed something had changed. It was only the beginning. The weapon worked, and that was the most terrifying part. The test results were marked classified, but secrecy never lasted long in human space. Every project left a trail. Unusual power requests, missing engineers, supply shipments with no listed destination. Curious officers and analysts began to notice patterns, and soon quiet whispers moved through military channels. They did not know the name Project Asterion, but they knew something had happened, something to clean, too sudden, too final. Stories spread in strange shapes. Some said humans had created a weapon that turned enemies to dust. Others claimed the device froze time itself. A few believed it controlled minds, though no one dared write that word down. Inside command. The truth was not written either. It was stored but not understood. Every high-ranking human official who saw the test report spent hours reading it in silence, then hours more staring at empty walls. The report did not explain the weapon. It only confirmed what everyone feared. Target systems surrendered without damage. That one line pushed imaginations farther than any weapon ever had. Human leadership met in secure rooms, far from prying eyes. They spoke softly, almost afraid the weapon could hear them. Admirals argued that this was the answer they had been waiting for, a tool that ended wars without mass death. Generals imagined deploying it once, ending conflict forever. Politicians dreamed of an era where humans could maintain peace without lifting a single gun. But the engineers remained quiet. They remembered the test too clearly. They remembered the echo of possibility dying, even though nothing physical had changed. The lead scientist of the project was called to speak before a strategic council. He stood before them in a plain uniform, holding no slides, no reports, no proof, only memory. The weapon does not strike ships, he began. It strikes direction. It strikes intention. It strikes the idea of fighting. The council asked for clear terms. The scientists struggled to give them. It is not destruction, he finally said. It is conclusion. The room did not accept that answer. They wanted a weapon of numbers and power, not philosophy. A device that destroyed fleets made sense. A device that removed the desire to fight did not. Word began to reach alien systems too, even though humans never confirmed anything. Alien intelligence networks monitored troop movement, energy traces, and encrypted communications. They felt a shift not in space, but in behavior. Human fleets stood down early. Patrols changed direction. Entire divisions vanished from war maps. Not destroyed, but withdrawn. Aliens did not know why. But they knew it was connected. In distant star systems, alien commanders spoke in hushed voices. Humans have found something, they said. They used it once. They will use it again. Fear grew faster than truth. Some alien worlds hurried to build new defenses, even though they did not know what they were defending against. Others tried to open secret channels, hoping to learn more. A few believed the rumors so deeply that they submitted without being asked, convinced humans could end them at any moment. Inside human space, High Command debated endlessly. Weeks passed and pressure rose. A senior admiral slammed his hand on a table during a late-night meeting. We have been searching for a clean end to war for centuries. Now we finally have it tanned. You want to stop? The lead scientist was calm, but his voice was strained. We do not know what we built, he replied. And we do not know what it does to us. The admiral did not understand. To us? He repeated. Why should we fear our own victory? Those words echoed through the room. A young strategist answered quietly. Because victory changes us. Her voice trembled. not with fear, but with certainty. She pointed to a report showing the behavior of every tester who had witnessed the activation. None had slept well since. All showed signs of doubt, hesitation, and reflection. As if the weapon had touched more than the battlefield, the council brushed it aside as stress. But the engineers knew better. Late at night, private messages, and long conversations in empty halls. They confessed to each other what they could not say aloud. It felt like the weapon looked at us too. They could not explain the feeling, but they could not ignore it. Something inside them had shifted. They were afraid of where that shift could lead. Meanwhile, the galaxy outside spiraled into speculation. Alien spies reported strange findings. Human ships gathering near a moon no one visited. Power readings that flared and disappeared, encrypted signals with no words. To alien leaders, it was obvious. Humanity was building something final. Diplomats sent messages requesting information. None were answered. Journalists tried to dig for truth. Questions were redirected. Strategic analysts ran simulations of the first test. None came close to predicting the result. Inside the moonbase, the device sat silent, covered in protective plates and surrounded by fear. No one wanted to turn it on again. No one dared to dismantle it either. One young engineer stared at the device late one evening and whispered to herself, "If this is what one activation does, what happens after 10? The question spread quietly through the minds of those who worked there. They knew the admirals and politicians would not stop demanding a second test. They knew fear of the unknown might push leadership forward instead of back. Rumors continued to grow, rumors of power, rumors of peace, rumors of something that ended wars by touching the heart of conflict itself. But no rumor was as frightening as the truth. The scientists knew. The weapon worked perfectly. No one understood how. The galaxy waited for humans to take the next step. Inside the test base, humans waited for something else, the wisdom to decide whether they should. Weeks passed, but the results of the first activation continued to trouble every person who had been involved. The scientists stopped arguing in meetings and started avoiding each other in hallways, as if speaking about the weapon might call it back into their minds. Military officers reported back to command with less confidence than before. They said the weapon worked, but their voices lacked pride. Something about the test felt wrong. No report could explain why. Secret analysts were assigned to review everything that happened on the distant battlefield. They studied the behavior of drones, AIs, and automated fleets. The data looked impossible. Every unit in the battle simulation changed course at the exact same moment. Not a second early, not a second late. It was as if a silent order had passed through every ship and every system at once. Without traveling through space or being carried by signals, one analyst stared at the final readings for days without rest. When his supervisor asked what he had learned, he answered quietly. It felt like the battlefield made its own decision. No one understood him, and he could not explain further. How could he? He barely understood himself. Behind closed doors, the lead scientist gathered the main project team. He looked tired, his voice weak from lack of sleep. On the table sat files containing the mental reports of the observers who watched the activation. None of them had been harmed physically, but every single one wrote the same sentence in their own way. It felt like I surrendered to. You'd watched a simulation, not a real war. Yet they felt defeated even though they were the ones who activated the weapon. The scientists read the reports in silence. One finally spoke, "This is not just a machine. It is influence." Another disagreed. "No. Influence can be resisted. This cannot," third whispered. "Maybe we've built something that changes the mind before it changes the world." They all went quiet. No one wanted to say what they were truly thinking, because if the weapon could touch decisions, then using it again might mean losing themselves. Outside the testing moon, whispers grew louder. Alien spies reported that humans were delaying deployment of their new weapon. That delay terrified alien leaders more than any rumor. If humans were afraid to use what they had made, then it must be something beyond imagination. Some alien cultures believed humans had created a weapon that erased courage. Others thought the weapon destroyed memory. A few believed humans had finally discovered how to break choice itself. None of them knew the truth. Their guesses were closer than they realized. Inside human command meetings, arguments became storms. Admirals demanded use of the weapon to end rising conflicts in nearby sectors. They spoke of safety, control, stability. Their voices were strong, but their eyes betrayed fear. They were afraid not of the enemy, but of the power they now held. The lead scientist stood before them again, holding a single sheet of paper. It contained no numbers, no graphs only, a summary of the mental impact recorded after activation. He read aloud, even after leaving the test chamber. Observers reported doubt about their own decisions. They questioned themselves even when answering simple questions. What to eat, where to go, when to sleep. The room stayed silent. He continued. It was as if the weapon placed a mirror inside their minds, forcing them to question every choice. A senior general stood up in anger. Are you saying the weapon damaged them? The scientist shook his head. No, it did something worse. It made them reflect. The general did not understand. Reflection sounded harmless to him, but the scientist knew what reflection could become when forced. Paralysis. If a weapon could create hesitation, then any species that faced Etan survived might carry that hesitation forever. And if humans used that weapon again, humans themselves might never trust their decisions again. That was the terror nobody admitted. Not the power to end wars, but the power to end certainty. Reports continued to arrive from the battlefield simulation. Engineers noticed something unsettling. Drones and automated systems that had been exposed to the weapon behaved differently afterward. They did not react instantly to commands anymore. They paused, calculated, considered as if they were unsure. Machines do not hesitate, one programmer said. But these did. Some began to wonder if the weapon affected something deeper than technology. If it reached beyond wires and circuits, beyond logic and code, perhaps it touched something inside consciousness, something between thought and instinct. In private conversations, the project team tried to make sense of the impossible. What if the weapon does not destroy anything? A physicist asked, another answered slowly. What if it destroys the need to continue? The room stayed silent. They all felt the same cold realization forming inside their minds. The weapon removed the will to fight not by force, but by understanding that was worse than control. Control could be resisted. Understanding could not. Rumors within the military reached the ears of old veterans who had survived real wars. Many of them reacted with quiet dread. One veteran, known for bravery and medals, said something that stayed with every listener. Weapons that break bones can be healed. Weapons that break the mind cannot, no one argued. Meanwhile, requests for activation grew stronger. Conflicts were rising across nearby systems. Human colonies asked for safety. Alien allies demanded help. The pressure increased each day. At night, the lead scientist sat alone in his office, staring at the device through a glass window. It did nothing. It made no sound. It sat like a harmless object waiting for someone else to decide its purpose. He whispered to himself, not as a scientist, not as a soldier, but as a human. If we use it again, we might win every war and lose ourselves doing it. The next morning, he sent a message to command with only 5 words. Do not activate it again. He did not expect them to listen. Because sometimes, the greatest danger is not what a weapon does to the enemy, but what it does to those who built it. The warning message from the lead scientist reached every major command office within hours. Yet no single reply came back right away. Human leaders did not know how to answer. Some understood the message clearly and felt the same fear. Others refused to believe that a weapon could be dangerous even without killing. And a few felt angry that anyone would try to stop what could become the greatest strategic advantage in human history. Meetings began at sunrise and ended long after midnight. Rooms filled with tired eyes, short tempers, and voices that refused to soften. The debates did not start with raised voices, but they always ended with them. In one large conference room, a Grand Admiral spoke firmly. We finally have a tool that can stop wars before they begin, he said. If we do nothing, conflicts will return stronger than before. We must be realistic. Across the table, the youngest engineer shook her head. You don't understand what happens after it works, she said. It does not just stop the enemy. It changes everyone who sees it. It changes us. The Admiral leaned forward. Peace always changes people. That is a price we pay gladly. The engineer looked him in the eye. This is not peace. This is control, even if we don't mean it to be. Silence filled the room. It was a silence that came not from agreement, but from unwillingness to accept the truth. Elsewhere, political leaders argued in private halls. Some believed the weapon was the beginning of a new era of safety. Others believed it would isolate humanity forever. One senator summarized the fear in a single line. If we use this weapon, every species in the galaxy will fear us. If we don't use it, every species in the galaxy will challenge us. It was a future without comfort. Alien diplomats added to the pressure. Some begged humans not to activate the device again. They did not want a universe where every choice bowed before human will. Others whispered requests for protection, hoping humans would become guardians, not rulers, but shields. Every message carried the same feeling: uncertainty. Inside military intelligence, secret studies showed a strange trend. After the first activation, alien aggression reduced. Not because humanity demanded it, but because other species did not want to risk facing something unknown. But that calm came with fear. It was not respect. It was not peace. It was hesitation. In another heated debate, a general slammed his fist on the table. If hesitation keeps them from attacking, we win without firing a shot. A commander across from him spoke softly. And what happens when hesitation becomes hatred? When fear becomes planning? When someone decides the only safe galaxy is one where humans cannot exist? The general stopped talking. In research labs, engineers continued trying to understand the weapon. They recorded interviews with those who watched the activation. Every person described the same effect: a pause inside themselves, a sudden question that seemed to rise from nowhere. Why am I doing this? Is this worth it? Should I stop? The engineers realized something chilling. The weapon did not force surrender. It invited surrender without speaking, without pushing, without pain. One of the scientists wrote in her personal notes, "Perhaps the weapon does not break. Will it reveals it." Those notes were never shown to command. Some truths felt too sharp to share. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, conflicts grew again. Small wars erupted between species that had nothing to do with humanity. Colonies requested help. Refugees begged for protection. Human forces watched from afar, commanded to hold position. The pressure to intervene increased with every message. A military strategist finally said what many others were thinking. If we have the power to stop suffering and we refuse to use it, then we are responsible for the blood spilled. Those words hit every listener like a stone. The room struggled with them. Was restraint noble or cruel? In one late-night meeting, the lead scientist stood again before high command. His voice was calm but tired, as if the weapon had already stolen years from his life. "You ask what this device could do to the galaxy," he said, "but you forget to ask what it could do to us." A general frowned. "We are strong. We can control ourselves." The scientist shook his head slowly. No species in history believed they were too weak to control themselves. Every empire thought restraint was easy in the beginning. He pointed to a screen showing old archives of human history. Moments when too much power had shaped the future before anyone. Notice, then, he said the words that made the room stop breathing. "We did not design this weapon to end war. We designed it to end resistance. And resistance is what keeps us human." The officers looked away, some in anger, some in shame, some in deep thought. The debate moved through every level of human society. Soldiers, engineers, students, and old veterans all argued around dinner tables, in training halls, across video calls. Families split. Friendships strained. Some said the weapon was salvation. Others said it was poison. Everyone felt the weight of the choice. One retired admiral wrote a private letter to his granddaughter, who served as a junior officer. It said only, "Victory changes the map. Power changes the mind. Be careful which one you choose." She read the letter many times, but she still did not know the answer. By the time the next major conflict erupted near human borders, the debate had not ended. It had only grown louder. The pressure became unbearable, and in that moment of rising danger, leadership made the decision everyone feared. The weapon would be activated one more time. No one knew how the galaxy would react. No one knew how they would react, but everyone understood the next activation would not just test the weapon again, it would test humanity itself. The order for a second activation arrived on a quiet morning, without ceremony or warning. The message was short, almost cold. Prepare the weapon. Deployment authorized. It did not mention how long the debate had lasted, how many arguments had been made, or how many people had silently prayed the decision would go the other way. It only stated the result. The time had come. Inside the test moon, engineers gathered again, in the same chamber where the first activation took place. Some had hoped they would never return. Others walked slower than usual, as if the walls themselves were heavier now. The device sat in the center of the room, unchanged, small, simple, harmless in appearance. But everyone present carried the memory of what it had already done. Outside the moon, distant conflict pulled the galaxy's attention. Two alien powers were fighting over a cluster of mining stations. Civilians were trapped. Trade routes were collapsing. The conflict was spreading. Human allies demanded intervention. Human enemies waited to see what humanity would do. The entire region felt like a spark waiting for fuel. Command declared the second activation a limited demonstration. But everyone knew a demonstration could become a precedent, and a precedent could become a habit. The lead scientist stood near the observation window, staring at the device without blinking. He had written letters, made speeches, and submitted reports. None of them changed the final decision. He felt responsible yet powerless at the same time. His hands trembled slightly, though no one noticed. The room filled with quiet tension as officers and engineers prepared. Systems stable, someone whispered. External targets linked, another replied. These words sounded like steps. Down a staircase no one wanted to reach the bottom of. The activation began with the same countdown as before. 10, 9, 8. A few people closed their eyes. Not to avoid the light there would be none, but to avoid watching history repeat itself. 3, 2, 1. For the second time, the device made no sound. And for the second time, something far away changed completely. Across the battle zone, ships froze mid-maneuver. Weapons powered down in perfect synchrony. Alarms stopped halfway through their first note. Commanders, human and alien, felt a pressure inside their minds, like a question whispered directly to their thoughts. Are you sure you want to continue? The question had no voice, no language, no source. But every mind felt it. In the control room, human officers watched in disbelief. Telemetry reports showed 0 damage again. But psychological readings told a different story. Pilots hesitated. Strategists lost confidence. Even machines slowed in decision-making, as if thinking. A young commander near the back of the room suddenly stepped forward and spoke without being asked. We shouldn't have done this. His voice shook. He didn't sound angry. He sounded lost. No one replied. Messages began arriving from the battlefield. I don't know if this fight matters. Why are we here? We don't feel like continuing. The weapon did not force surrender. It removed the reason to fight. And in doing so, it created something worse than defeat. It created doubt. Hours later, the conflict ended quietly. No side claimed victory. Neither side could explain why they stopped. They simply stopped. Human command declared the mission a success. But no celebration followed. The lead scientist walked slowly through the corridors after the activation. Engineers avoided his eyes, and officers turned away, as if afraid he might speak a truth they were not ready to hear. He reached a small break room and sat down. Resting his face in his hands, he whispered to himself, barely audible. It didn't just silence the battle. It silenced us. His assistant found him there and sat beside him. She did not ask questions. She simply waited. Finally, he spoke again. It is not a weapon of destruction, he said. It is a weapon of reflection. And reflection without choice is horror. His assistant nodded slowly. I felt it too, she said. I felt smaller. Not weaker, just smaller. He looked up, meeting her eyes. That is the danger. It does not break our bodies. It breaks our certainty. Outside human space, alien leaders reacted with mixed emotions. Some felt relief the conflict ended. Others felt terror that humans could end wars without firing a shot. A few asked the hardest question. If humans can make us question our choices, who questions theirs? Human soldiers who watched the activation reported something unexpected. They felt doubt too. Not about the enemy. About themselves. One officer wrote in his log, I suddenly wondered if taking orders was the same as choosing. I could not tell the difference anymore. After reading that entry, the lead scientist realized the truth he feared. The weapon did not target sides, factions, or enemies. It targeted the idea of conflict itself and everyone. Rumors spread again, but now they carried a new tone. Not curiosity, not pride, but unease. And while Command called the second activation a victory, many knew better. This victory had a cost they could not measure yet. Late that night, while the testing moon slept, the scientist returned to the device alone. He stood before it and placed his hand gently on the cold surface. He spoke in a soft, strained voice. If we use you again, we will not know who we are. There was no response. But the silence felt deeper than before, as if the weapon understood and waited for humanity's next decision. The second activation ended the conflict, but it did not bring the peace humanity expected. Instead, it brought a strange heaviness that spread through every level of human society. People spoke less, thought more, and carried the feeling that something important had shifted inside them, not outside. The galaxy calmed on the surface, but fear grew underneath the calm. It's like deep water hiding strong currents. Human leaders could no longer pretend the weapon was only a tool. The second activation proved something no one wanted to admit. The weapon touched everyone who knew it existed. Even people who only heard whispers of it felt unsure of their own convictions. The power to stop wars had come with a terrible side effect. It could also stop belief. High Command called for an emergency summit. It was not public. It was not recorded. It was attended by the oldest admirals, the wisest scientists, the most experienced diplomats, and a small group of historians who were invited for a single reason, to remind everyone of the past. They sat around a long table in a silent hall. No banners, no flags, no uniforms with medals. Everyone came dressed simply, as if they did not want to bring pride into the room. The first to speak was a historian with white hair and tired eyes. He said power always demands to be used again. That is how it grows. No one argued. They had already seen it happen once, then twice. The lead scientist spoke next. His voice was flat from exhaustion. We built something that changes the way minds work, he said, but we do not understand how. That means we cannot predict what it will do next time more, what it will turn us into. A general raised his hand slowly. We are soldiers, he said. Our duty is to protect. If we lock this weapon away and the galaxy falls into chaos again, can we live with that? His question felt heavy. The scientist replied softly, if we use it again and we lose ourselves, can we live with that? The room did not breathe for several seconds. Debates followed, long, emotional, exhausting debates. Some argued that the weapon was the best chance at preventing future wars. Others argued that the weapon was not preventing war, it was preventing certainty. And without certainty, humanity might lose more than battles. The youngest diplomat, who had once believed in strong action, finally said, this weapon gives peace without understanding. Peace without understanding is not peace, is pause. Now those words spread through the hall. Heads bowed. Some wrote the words down. Others closed their eyes. Everyone felt the truth in them. After hours of silence and discussion, someone finally said what no one wanted to say aloud. We must destroy Project Asterion. The sentence echoed through the chamber like a verdict, but destroying it was not simple. Copies existed, encrypted blueprints, hidden notes, backup drives sealed in vaults. The weapon itself could be taken apart, but its design lived in data, in memories, and in human pride. A vote was held. It was the largest secret vote in human history. There was no cheering, no applause, no victory speech. Only stillness, as every person cast their decision. When the final tally appeared, there were no gasps, no dramatic reactions. Only sadness and relief combined. The decision was clear. Project Asterion must be erased. Not hidden. Not controlled. Erased. Engineers were ordered to gather every version of the blueprint. Storage rooms were opened. Archives were scanned. Vaults were unlocked. The weapon was dismantled piece by piece. Each part was melted or crushed or broken in a way that could not be reversed. Every document was deleted, overwritten, burned, or disassembled. Even the notes written by hand were destroyed, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Some of the engineers cried softly as they worked, not because they wanted power, but because they knew what they were giving up. One whispered to another, "We built something amazing and terrible," her colleague answered. Maybe the strength was building it, but the wisdom is letting it go. When the final physical piece of the weapon was gone, silence filled the room. People stood together, not speaking, united by a feeling that was neither pride nor sorrow, but something in between. Soon after, Human Command sent a short encrypted message to key diplomatic channels. The project has ended. There will be no third activation.
Aliens
reacted with disbelief. Some demanded proof. Some felt relief so deep it turned into tears. Others wondered if humanity was lying. But secretly, most of them respected humanity more that day than ever before, because no empire in history has ever chosen to destroy its own advantage. That night, the lead scientist returned home for the first time in months. He sat alone on his balcony, watching stars move slowly across the sky. He felt tired, but lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his thoughts. His assistant visited briefly to check on him. Before leaving, she asked quietly, "Do you think we did the right thing?" He did not answer right away. He looked at the stars, so many, so distant, so full of possibility. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know if it was the right choice, but it was a choice we could live with." And he added in a softer voice, "And that might be more important than being right." And the galaxy slept that night without knowing what had almost happened. Project Asterion was gone. The weapon that could end wars by ending certainty would never return. But a question remained, a question that would echo through history. If humanity can destroy its greatest power, what other powers might they be capable of refusing? Years passed after Project Asterion was destroyed. The debates ended, the files vanished, and the weapon itself became only a memory held by those who had seen it. At first, the galaxy expected humanity to rebuild the device in secret. Many believed humans could not resist the temptation of such power forever, but time proved them wrong. There were no hidden tests, no mysterious signals, no sudden changes in battle outcomes. The weapon did not return still. Something remained. A quiet presence. The memory of what humans once built, and what they chose to erase. Alien historians visited human worlds to learn why. They walked through museums filled with old machines, sat in lecture halls where students argued about past mistakes, and studied laws that restricted power instead of expanding it. They discovered that humans did not hide their history of conflict. Instead, humans taught it in simple language. Two children who barely understood war. One alien historian wrote in his journal, "Humans do not fear enemies. They fear becoming their own enemy." Back in human space, life continued. Fleets patrolled borders. Traders carried supplies between systems. Scientists built new tools for medicine, travel, and communication. The universe did not stand still simply because one weapon was gone. Yet everywhere, in every discussion about danger and leadership, someone eventually repeated the same sentence. "Remember what we destroyed?" The sentence needed no explanation. It reminded people that humans had held a kind of power no one else understood and let it go. That act alone became a quiet guide, shaping policies and choices for generations. During conflicts between alien species, humanity helped only when invited. Sometimes human forces stepped between two warring sides to create corridors for civilians. Sometimes human diplomats opened negotiations in neutral zones. But they always left once stability returned. They never stayed long enough to become rulers. At first, many alien leaders believed humans were simply pretending. They suspected a strategy hidden beneath the silence, a slow path toward influence. But influence never came. Control never spread. Humans did not build new empires. They built boundaries, rules that prevented themselves from holding too much authority for too long. And gradually, the galaxy began to see restraint, not as weakness, but as strength. Children across different species learned stories about humanity's choice. These stories were not taught as legends or myths, but as lessons. Some species admired the humans for refusing permanent power. Others did not fully understand the decision, but respected the results. A few believed humans could still rebuild the weapon someday. But no one knew how, in that mystery alone kept greed and aggression from growing too large. In quiet moments, alien philosophers wondered if a galaxy without a single ruler was better, not easier, not safer, but better. Conflicts continued, but victories were smaller and losses less final. When power concentrated too quickly, neighbors pushed back. Everyone remembered what humanity destroyed. No one dared push past the point of no return. Meanwhile, the humans who had personally worked on Project Asterion grew older. Some retired to peaceful places, raising families, tending gardens, or traveling quietly between worlds. They did not brag about their work. They did not reveal secrets. Sometimes they sat together and shared memories, not of the weapon itself, but of the fear they felt when they realized what it could do. One evening, long after he retired, the lead scientist visited a university on a distant human world. Students gathered to hear him speak. They expected answers, technical details, final truths, hidden warnings. Instead, the scientist began with a simple question. "Do you know why we stopped?" The room was silent. Students looked at each other, unsure if they should reply. He continued gently. "We stopped because we understood something important. Winning is not the same as surviving. Survival is not the same as living. And living is not the same as becoming proud of what you are." A student raised her hand and asked, "Do you ever regret destroying the weapon?" The scientist paused for a long time. He looked out the window at a sky filled with stars. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, "but regret does not mean we were wrong. It means we remember the cost." The students wrote his words down carefully. Far from that classroom, alien archaeologists studied old battlefields. They found no trace of Project Asterion, not a single part, not a single blueprint. But they did find something unexpected: evidence of restraint. Moments when human forces stepped back instead of moving forward. When they helped stop a war without shaping its outcome. One archaeologist sent a message back to her home world that simply said, "They are dangerous because they can choose not to be." Generations changed. The people who had built the weapon passed away. Their students became teachers, and their children grew up with stories that sounded almost unreal. But the lesson survived not as fear, but as caution. Humanity's greatest victory was not creating a weapon others could not match. Humanity's greatest victory was understanding themselves before it was too late. The galaxy never forgot that moment across distant systems. As new conflicts rose and fell, leaders repeated the same quiet rule: do not reach for power you cannot release. Because somewhere in the past, humans had proven that releasing power was possible, and that choice shaped the stars far more than ruling them ever could. And so the legacy of Project Asterion lived on. Not as a weapon, not as a secret, but as a memory. The memory of what humans could build, and what they refused to become.